There we go. Okay, so today's theme is victory gardens. So you might be thinking, what the heck does propagation have to do with victory gardens? When you think of a victory garden, you think of growing vegetables, basically. But in actuality, victory gardens were started for a number of reasons. First and foremost, to kind of stretch the budget in times of scarce resources. Check, that fits. Secondly, to kind of beautify your own home garden and the community gardens. Check, that fits. And lastly, victory gardens were kind of pushed to create kind of healthy activity to help with your both physical and mental well-being during times of stress. Check, check, check. There you go. And, you know, the interesting thing is, victory gardens seem like an old concept, but those things, they're relevant today. So, you know, go victory gardens, you know? Today we're going to be talking about vegetative propagation. But before we get into that, I want to take a step back and talk about propagation in general. Let me move over here. Okay, there are two types of propagation. There's sexual and asexual. Sexual propagation is seeds. It's where you've got a plant that gets pollinated, it gets fertilized, sets seeds. Those seeds are then planted and a new plant grows. And on those plants, the plant that you get from the seed is a product of both parent plants, just like a kid when you have a kid. You know, it comes from both parents. Asexual propagation is essentially cloning. You are taking plant material other than seeds, and you will generate a new plant from that. And there are various methods of asexual propagation, and that plant has the same exact genetic makeup as the single parent. So there are types of asexual propagation, and that's also called vegetative propagation. And today we're going to be talking about division, cuttings, and layerings. In the time that I have, we don't have time to get into other topics, but you did have some grafting in your rhododendron presentation, and there was seed starting. I think Shauna talked about seed starting last week. So you've gotten kind of quite a bit of propagation through the series. The first thing that I want to talk about in talking about propagation, and if you only remember one thing out of this session, this is the thing to remember. When you're talking about vegetative propagation, you are cutting through and wounding a plant. So you are exposing that plant to the environment, if you will, and to anything that's on your tools or in your pots. So you want to make sure that your pots and your tools are both clean and disinfected. So pots, if you have a brand new pot, generally sterile, don't worry about it too much. But if it's been behind the garage, it's out in the elements, or if you're reusing it, make sure to wipe off any dirt and debris and soak that or plop that into a 10% bleach solution, rinse it off, dry it off, you're good to go. Now, the same thing holds true with tools, and that means any tool that you're using during propagation. You could use the 10% bleach solution for that, but that's pretty corrosive on your tool, so there are some better options. You can use a 70%, I don't know how to say this, isopropyl alcohol. You can get those in wipes, or you can just make your own. Wipe that on your debris-free tools and leave it on there, don't rinse it off. Or you can use, you know, like the foaming or spray disinfecting bathroom cleaners, put those on there, wipe it off, don't rinse it. Or just get the disinfecting wipes, which are, you know, easy to put a few of those in your pocket while you're out in the garden. The key is you can't just do it before you start for the day. You have to disinfect your tools in between every plant, because if one plant has, you know, a fungus or a virus, you're going to get that on your tool and you're going to carry it over to the next plant. And trust me, I know this from experience. Not fun. Okay, so you've got your tools clean. The first topic we're going to talk about, or the first method, is division. And there are a number of reasons to divide, and it's really kind of straightforward, an easy thing to do. But you may want to divide your plants just to make more plants. And so it's dividing to multiply, and that's garden math that we all really like, dividing to multiply. The second reason is that the perennial may be getting too large for its space. It may be encroaching into other areas, and so you want to divide it to control the size. And the third reason is that your perennial, maybe it's looking kind of wimpy. It's not blooming as well as it once did. It's not standing up as straight. It's kind of dying out in the middle. It just doesn't have the same vigor that it once did. Those are telltale signs that that plant needs to be divided for its health. And many perennials need to be divided like every 3 to 5 years. So just keep that in mind. Now you've decided you're going to divide a plant. There are 2 questions you're going to ask yourself before you start. And one is it the right time of year? And the second one is, what type of crown and root structure does it have? So is it the right time of year? Not all plants can be divided, anytime. Most perennials can be divided in the spring. Some can be divided in the spring and the fall. There's a general rule of thumb that spring flowering perennials can be divided in the fall, and summer and fall blooming perennials can be divided in the spring. There are some plants that can only be divided at one particular time of year, and an example of that is ornamental grasses. So think of Hakanakloa, Japanese forest grass. Those types of things can only be divided in the spring because that's when they're going to generate new root growth. So rather than memorizing all this stuff, in the handouts that are online, I've put in links for 2 resources. One's from the University of Minnesota, one's from Clemson University. And they have charts with that. I know the Minnesota one, I think it has 125 perennials listed. And it will tell you kind of what time of year it needs to be divided, why it's divided, and how often. So it's a really great resource. So if you're unsure, then look it up before you start, because you don't want to waste your time and then have the plant die. The second question is, what type of root and crown structure does the plant have? And this matters because it'll tell you kind of what types of tools you need to use for dividing. And there are basically 5 types of root and crown structures for perennials. The first one is clumpers, and that's where you have kind of a solid mass of a crown structure. You've got stems coming up, multiple stems coming up, and then the roots coming down from the bottom. Similar to the clumper is the tight woody crown, and that looks very similar, but that crown is extremely dense, and so you'll need some different tools for that. Next one is kind of runners and suckers, and that is plants where you've got a parent plant and then adjacent to it but not attached, you've got another plant, and there could be a stem above ground, maybe not. If it's a sucker, you probably don't see anything other than the new plant coming up over on the side. The fourth type is rhizomes and tubers. Rhizomes, think of iris. It has that underground stem. Most people think that's a root. It's actually an underground stem, and that goes horizontally, kind of at or near, the ground level. And then tubers, they operate kind of horizontally. So it's a underground stem. They kind of look like little boglets often, and they go horizontally. The one type of root and crown structure that can't be propagated by division is basically the woody kind of stem and or single taproot. You know, you can't divide a single thing without killing the plant. So those you need to use different means of propagation, different methods of propagation. So we're going to start and talk some specific steps on dividing the various types of root and crown structures. The first thing for all of these types is to make sure that your soil is moist. So if you're going to do it and the soil is dry, go out the night before and water the plants or a couple of hours before so that that soil can absorb the moisture and be moist but not wet, if you will. So your soil is moist, you're going to go and you're going to dig out the entire plant that you want to divide. And a good rule of thumb is to go from the edge of the stem, the outside stem, and go about 5 inches or so and use that as your circumference and gently dig out the plant. If you go down that level with your clean, sharp shovel and you hit a root, go out a little bit further because you want to keep as much of the root structure intact as you can. You want to keep it healthy and start with the best beginning that you can. So you're going to dig it out, you'll shake off the excess soil or rinse it off, and then divide it. On some of the clumpers, you can actually take and jiggle it apart with your hands. On some of them, you might have to use the shovel to divide it. And you're going to divide it into sections that are about a handful. So you want it to have a good basis for beginning. So about a handful is a pretty good amount. So you'll do that, and hopefully at this point you have already figured out what you're going to do with those divisions. So you're either going to put them in a pot or put them in the ground someplace. If you haven't, you want to make sure you get a bucket of water, a nice clean bucket of water, and put it in there so that you keep the roots moist until you figure out what you're going to do with it. You know, so if you're going to put it in a pot, you want to make sure that your pot is big enough so that you're not jamming it in there so it has a healthy beginning to start with. You want your roots to fit in there comfortably, and you want to plant it at the same depth. So you need to make sure you have an appropriate size pot. If you're putting it in the ground, you want to plant it at the same depth, but you want to make the hole twice as wide. You want to give those roots a chance to grow. Then you're going to water it in and you're going to treat it just like you would any newly planted plant. For dividing the tight woody crown, think of peonies, if you will. It's about the same as a clumper, but you may have to use an axe or a saw to break apart those peonies because they are, you know, we had a demonstration once, and I mean, whack it away. You almost need like a Pulaski, no pun intended, to whack that apart. But you treat it the same as you do a clumper. But keep in mind, if you're dividing peonies, because they come to mind, they're not going to bloom for about 3 years. So don't panic when you plant it and it's growing leaves great, but it's not blooming. It's not going to, that's just the way they work. So the next, dividing runners and suckers, you know, very straightforward, very easy, but you probably don't need a big shovel. You might be good with just a small gardening spade and or perhaps a little gardening saw to break apart from the parent. So it's just a question of kind of using different tools. You will cut apart if there's an above ground stem, you'll break that on, you know, perhaps both sides, perhaps just one side, and break any or cut through any horizontal roots that are underground, and then dig it out and plant it up. It's easy peasy. Not much to it, but again, you know, just different tools and a slightly different methodology. For rhizomes and tubers, these are a little bit different. These ones you want to wait until after, for rhizomes, you want to wait until after the plant is done blooming, and then you're going to dig out the entire plant. You'll cut the stems, you know, about 4 or 5 inches there. And then you're going to cut that rhizome such that each part of that rhizome has a stem coming out from it and has roots coming down from below. On many of the rhizomes, you can just go ahead and replant them, and they will go through the winter just fine. Canna lily is one that's listed there. Cannas, you might want to wrap those in some newspaper or put them in a brown paper bag and store them over the winter. They don't like to freeze, so you know, you might want to overwinter those. With tubers, and kind of think of dahlias, begonias, those you are going to wait until it's done flowering, until the leaves are kind of dying back. Then you're going to dig it up and you'll kind of let that dry out, shake off, you know, the excess soil and such. You're going to let that kind of dry out for about a week, and then you're going to take apart and cut off the tubers, and each tuber is going to need to have an eye on it, and the eye is the part that's going to grow into a stem. And those should be overwintered, and you can overwinter those. You don't want those to dry out like a tulip bulb or something. You want those to you know, put them in some sawdust or some wood shavings just to keep them so they don't fully dry out. So that's division. It's, you know, an easy way. It's pretty straightforward. That it's not rocket science. So cuttings. We're going to talk about stem cuttings today, and we're going to talk about herbaceous, softwood, and hardwood. And some general rules of thumb. You want to make sure that you are taking cuttings from healthy plants. You don't want to propagate a diseased plant necessarily, because the disease will stay with it. However, there are some occasions if you are trying to save an heirloom, you know, plant that's been in the family for years and you want to try and save it, go for the healthiest stems that you can find and then give it a try. I mean, it's kind of like, what do you have to lose, really? So give it a try. But generally speaking, you want to propagate healthy plants. You also want to take your cuttings first thing in the morning. That is when the plant holds the most moisture. So you want to take those stems when they have the most moisture. Also, what do I have next here? For particularly herbaceous and softwood cuttings, you want to keep those moist between the time you cut them and the time you process or plant them. So, you know, use a wet paper towel or put them in, you know, in some water just to keep them there until you can process them. The next one, it's recommended that you use a rooting hormone to help give the cuttings a better start. The one thing I would really recommend is that you take some of the rooting hormone, if it's a powder or a liquid, take some of that and pour it into a smaller container. And the reason for that is that if you end up with a stem that does have fungus or virus or some bacteria, you're not going to ruin that whole jar of rooting hormone. You're going to ruin, you know, just a much smaller amount, and that stuff, you know, isn't cheap. So pour some of that out, put it into a smaller container and use that. And then when you're done, discard that. Don't pour it back into the larger container. And then for these types and the hardwood, for all types of cuttings, with some exceptions, you want to use a sterile mix. You want to use a mixture of like perlite and soilless mix or sand, and that allows aeration. To generate the roots, you don't need that fertile soil. So put your stem cuttings into that mix, and then once they establish roots, then put it into potting soil. So herbaceous cuttings, the first type we're going to talk about is really talking about herbaceous perennials, and those are the non-woody stemmed perennials. And these are the easiest to root. They generally root much quicker than either softwood or hardwood cuttings. A number of these you can actually just plop in water and they will grow. And so I keep a little collection of narrow necked little jars, and you know, you can do geraniums, hardy fuchsias, tender fuchsias, coleus work, you know, extremely well. So it's not just perennials, you can also do some annuals with that. So, you know, give that a try. Once they establish roots of about 1 inch, then you're going to put them into the potting soil. You can put them into a little pot, or you can put them right out on your patio container. It's a great way to kind of fill out your patio containers. You buy your plants a little early in the season when you get excited. You know, take off some cuttings right off the bat, and you will multiply your, you know, your number of plants for that. But also you can do the herbaceous cuttings into the soil mix. So you're going to cut those below a leaf node, about 1/2 inch below a leaf node. You're going to want about a 3 to 5 inch section of stem, and then for the herbaceous, you know, you don't really need to use the rooting hormone, but you can, it won't hurt anything, and put that into your rooting medium. And then how do you tell when it's ready to be potted? Well, you can either see roots coming out the bottom of your pot, or if you pull on it, just give it a little tug. If there's resistance, that means that it's established roots, and so you can then repot it. Okay, softwood cuttings, we're talking, well, to determine if it's ready to be a softwood cutting, you take the top 6 inches of the stem, you bend it on itself, and if it breaks with a snap, it's ready to be a softwood cutting. If it smushes in the middle and kind of bends or creases, it's not mature enough to take the softwood cutting. Or if it doesn't break, it just holds firm, then it's too mature. So there's kind of a sweet spot for softwood cutting. So you want to hear that snap. And for these are beginning to mature, so they're going to take a little longer to establish roots. So they're not as quick as the herbaceous. They're going to take a little bit longer. And you usually do this in the summer months. I am a very strong proponent of, this is a book called Cuttings, what's it called? Cuttings Through the Year. It's from the Arboretum Foundation in Seattle. Very inexpensive, and it gives a month-by-month listing of what plants can be cut, you know, during that given month, and whether it's a softwood or hardwood cutting. And there's information in the handout about that. So to take your herbaceous cutting, you're going to cut that. You're going to look for healthy stems, preferably from like the main stem or an offshoot of that, you know, something that's very healthy. You're going to go about 1/2 inch below the node. And on a softwood cutting, and don't ask me why, you want to cut that at an angle on the bottom and then straight across the top. And one of the reasons for that is if you're doing a lot of cuttings, you know which is the bottom and which is the top, because you're going to remove the nodes from that. You're going to remove all but the top leaves, and it just, you know, makes it very quick and easy to then plant those into the rooting medium. So again, you're going to cut about a 3 to 5 inch piece and pinch off the leaves. If it has large leaves, you may want to cut those remaining leaves in half. And the reason for that is that you want the plant to focus on generating new roots rather than focusing on maintaining leaves. So it will divert the energy away from, you know, maintaining the leaves down to root growth. So you're going to do that. You're going to remove the bottom nodes, and you can also take a clean razor or your pruners and kind of strip off the bark about 1/2 inch on the bottom on one side. And that opens the wound, and it's from these wounds that the roots will end up growing. So you're going to dip that in rooting hormone. You will have your prepared pots with your moistened rooting medium and either a pot or a tray if you're doing a lot of cuttings from a plant. You want to mark your cuttings because you think you're going to remember what plant it is, and you won't. At least I don't. And so then you're going to take your pots or your tray and you're going to encase it in plastic. You're going to make its own little mini greenhouse, and that will help maintain the moisture and humidity for that plant. And you will put it in indirect light, not in direct sunlight, because that will fry the plant. And then you wait, monitor the moisture, make sure it's remaining moist, and then wait until the roots grow. And then you want to transplant that. You don't want to put that directly into your landscaping. You want to put that into a pot with potting soil so that it can really kind of establish in the potting soil, then put it into the landscaping. Okay, this is in the handout, so I won't focus. This is just some of the plants that work well for herbaceous and softwood cuttings. So that's in the handout material. We'll move on to hardwood cuttings, and those are somewhat similar in terms of the steps you take, but with differences. And hardwood cutting, again, is you're going to look at the top 6 inches. And when you bend it on itself, it doesn't break. It's firm. And this is generally later in the season. One thing I forgot to mention on these cuttings is you want current year's growth for both the softwood and the hardwood. You want current year's growth. So this is a little bit more mature current year's growth. And these tend to happen in the fall or the winter. And you can do, a longer, you can go up to like a 20-inch or what have you stem on these, and you are going to remove all of the leaves and the nodes. You're going to put this into the planting material, the rooting material, and then you're not going to put a little greenhouse on this one. You're going to put it like in a cold frame or something to protect it from freezing, but you don't need that humidity and moisture. So these ones are going to take longer. So you want to maintain, the moisture throughout. You want to check it periodically. And this one you need to exercise a little patience because it will take longer for these to root. I hit everything. Again, you're going to use the rooting hormone. You're going to bury the bottom half. And when you're putting it into your pot or your tray, use a dowel or a pencil for both the softwood and the hardwood cuttings. Use a dowel to create your hole, and that will help keep the rooting hormone on the plant where you want it to be. And so that will be the least disruptive to that stem, and then water it in. And again, you're going to transplant this. Once it does establish roots, you'll transplant this to a potting soil and then into the ground. Again, this is in the materials that the last propagation technique we're going to talk about is layering. And layering, it kind of happens by nature. If you leave a plant like a rhododendron and it gets leggy, oftentimes the ones lowest to the ground will kind of do this naturally. Well, you can cause this to happen by taking a lower leggy stem of a plant, and what you're going to do is figure out where it's going to touch the ground, and then 3 inches above it and 3 inches below it, you're going to remove any nodes and leaves, and you're going to rough up the bottom. You'll cut into the bottom with a clean tool up to about 1/3 of that stem. You're going to put that under the ground, you know, and your soil should be loose. If it's compacted or clay, you want to rough it up a little bit, maybe add some compost, do something to lighten up and improve the tilth, if you will. You're going to put that down on the ground, and then if it stays there on its own, great. If it doesn't, you're going to put a rock or a brick or a landscape thing. What am I thinking of?
Paver.
Well, paver, but a little, you know, the hooky bob thing, like a tent stake kind of a thing, you know, a stake, a landscape stake, you know, just to keep it so it is in contact with the soil. And then you'll keep it moist, but generally speaking, in our weather, you can kind of forget about it. And in about 12 to 18 months, you know, if you take your rock or whatever and it stays down, or you can check to see if there are roots that have grown, then you've got yourself a new plant. And then you treat it like a runner or a sucker, cut it off, dig it up, and plant it. The drawback with layering, and Jeannie will vow to this, is that, you know, you end up not with the perfectly upright structure of a plant like you would get at a nursery. It may be a little wonky. So if you don't mind wonky, or if it's going in the second tier of your layered landscaping, different definition of layered there, but you know, you've got yourself a new plant, and you know, for a little bit of time and not much money. So to wrap it up, just a couple of comments. I would be remiss if I didn't say it is illegal to propagate a patented plant. So that's my little caveat here, that if you've got a plant that is patented, plants can be patented for 20 years and they're not renewed. So an example, the original endless summer hydrangea, it was patented in 2004. I looked this up. And so after 2004, it is no longer illegal to propagate that plant. It is, however, still legal to like sell it and call it the original endless summer. So there's patents and trademarks. You know, for most of us, you know, I'm not sure anybody's, you know, the SWAT team is going to come on you because you propagated a plant, but I do want people to realize this, and particularly those who perhaps propagate for their garden clubs, for sales and things. That's where you can get yourself in trouble, is trying to sell stuff. So that's your caveat. And then keep in mind that not every attempt is going to work, but if you're like me, I've got more time than money. So, you know, it's kind of fun to do this. It's very satisfying when it does work. And it's a great little hobby. And, you know, my kids have reaped the benefit of landscaping their yards with plants that I've propagated, whether they want them or not. And so it's really a fun little hobby to have. So thank you very much. And these are the resources. I know I sound like I'm plugging this, but it really is a great little booklet to have, $8.95. And so good luck with that. And are there any questions?
What is the name of the books?
It is called Cuttings Through the Year. And if you go to the handout online, it'll give you instructions. You can't technically buy it online. You have to contact the Arboretum, and then they'll charge you $5 to get it mailed to you. Or if you go up and have a lovely afternoon in the Arboretum walking around, go into the store there and buy it. And mine is like 2003, and it was only like $5.95, but it's now $8.95, and it was updated like 2018. And it's great because it has plants that we have in our area. So it's very specific to Western Washington.
I have a question about hydrangea. Mine died. They're very good at it. And so I know it has to do with something about when I try to trim them back.
Well, and There are different types of hydrangeas, so you want to look at the type of hydrangea you have, because some flowers bloom on new wood, some bloom on old wood. So you need to look at the variety of hydrangea that you have and then figure out when to prune it. So there's not one set answer on a hydrangea.
That's it.
So yeah, so you know, there's paniculata, there's, you know, this type, there's that type, and they grow differently. So yeah. And that would be a very good question. If you know the type of hydrangea that you have, that would be a great clinic question.
It
So
lost its little tag. I mean, it's just.
well, you can, you know, maybe kind of describe the blooms and we can maybe figure it out.
Okay.
And our clinicians are always looking for interesting challenges. So, you know, and you got nothing to lose. It's free and, you know.
But thank you. You know,
Yeah.
see how it goes.
Yeah. And the one thing you know, on the plants layering, the one hydrangeas are so easy to propagate. I mean, most hydrangeas you can stick in water and it will create roots and you can replant it. The climbing hydrangea, that lends itself very well to layering. That's one of the plants, you know, I think of layering and I always think of rhododendrons, but the climbing hydrangeas really works well with layering, probably the best way to propagate one of those.
And if the climbing hydrangea is growing up the side of your like cottage or something like that, does it have any damage going on, you know, with
that? I don't know if it has suckers. I don't think it has suckers, but the one thing, I mean, it will hold moisture, you know, in between the plant and the house. So, you know, that's something to be aware of. But I'm not, I don't have a climbing hydrangea. I know one of our master gardeners, Pat Carpenter, has a lot of hydrangeas, but that's another question to ask the clinic. Yeah. Yes.
We have tons of salal that we want in one area of our property, but we have a slope that has been planted with noble firs that we want to thin out, but we want to prevent blackberries and what's the other thing that's awful? So a healthy ground cover. Can we just take the new growth and take it, you know, cut the old salal, take it down, put it under, you know, some soil and lay it down, and will that take off? Or
You can try it. You can try it. I've never tried. I mean, I'm always trying to get rid of salal. But you can try that, but you can also do softwood cuttings with salal. So get yourself a tray and then, you know, follow the steps for softwood cuttings for salal. I mean, go 1/2 inch under the node and give it a try again. You know, this is one of those things, what do you got to lose if you've got the time? You know, see what works. I would also try putting salal. To me, it's, you know, kind of so invasive. I would try and putting that in water and saying if you can root it in water. So I've never tried it. Like I say, I'm always trying to get rid of it. But, you know, again, what do you have to lose?
okay, thank you.
So yeah, and when you're putting things in water, you just want to make sure you keep the water clean and that you remove any leaves that could, you know, go into the water. You want to keep that because that will create, you know, fungus and all that kind of fun stuff. So, okay.
Well, just one last one. What if you have kind of a slight cliff type
slope?
situation, you want to protect it with some roots? All we have is blackberry and I want to pull those out. You know, I'm getting to the point where I can now.
Yeah.
And what would, outside of Kinnikin, whatever that is, and that sort of thing, you know, can you put something better than, I mean, like I'm thinking lavender or something that I'd like?
Yeah, you know, you want to make sure if you're planting perennials down there that, you know, you want to make sure that it has the proper conditions. It's in the proper site. It's going to get the right, you know, amount of sunlight, the right amount of water, and those types of things. So yeah, I mean, I've seen hillsides with lavender and other plants, but you know, they do require more maintenance. Some of the ground covers may be a little bit, you know,
More
easier,
durable.
well, more durable and less, you know, require less maintenance, if you will. So,
Yeah.
you know, keep in mind lavender, in order for that to kind of maintain its appearance year after year, you've got to prune that back every year.
Sure.
So it is not, necessarily a
not
low
easy.
maintenance, yeah.
Right.
So
What would you use that would be?
I would, my first thing that came to my mind was kinnikinnick. But, pardon? Catoni aster, yeah, something that's, a little bit more drought resistant,
What's that
easy.
look like?
Catoni aster, it kind of looks like kinnikinnick. That it's low growing, it has small kind of leathery type leaves and it will produce berries.
Uh-huh.
Like an orange berry.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I've seen that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
yeah, I mean, we've got a whole group of master gardeners in here, so anybody else chime in?
Something with a little more height off the ground than that and then just,
Oregon grape
okay,
or salal,
yeah, so I'm thinking select.
yeah,
I
so.
can create that, we have a lot of
Yeah,
that, just not the
yeah.
right way.
Yeah, I would look up native ground covers. And that way it's, the least amount of maintenance, the most drought resistant.
Right,
And so, go online and look up Pacific
thank
Northwest
you.
native ground covers. And, another resource that's really great is the Great Plant Picks website.
The great
It-
plant.
Great Plant Picks website. It is from the Elizabeth Miller Garden organization, and you can go onto that website and there are resources there and it will give you a list of questions. I want a plant that's good in sunlight, grows minimum height, maximum height, leaves, what color, drought resistant, deer resistant, all these different factors, and it will pull up from their list, and they test plants. So theirs isn't, every plant on earth. It's the plants that they've tested and that they recommend in various situations, but it's a great resource to use.
Yeah, thank you.
All righty.
Is there one question in chat?
Have you ever tried propagating blueberries and huckleberries?
I have not, but I do think on the list, blueberry, they're vaccinium, right? Vaccinium, yeah. I think you can take softwood cuttings of the huckleberry and propagate that. So I think you can do a softwood cutting. I have not done that. Huckleberry is another one I'm trying to get rid of. So, and I know huckleberries don't transplant. They're a little bit tender to transplant, but you can, I think, take softwood cuttings on those and give that a whirl.